So we're going
Oh,
live
that's
for
good.
YouTube.
Oh, that's good. The little things come up say view stream on YouTube. Great. Cool in the gang.
So hopefully we will appear there. So we're going live for
good.
YouTube. So we are now live on YouTube. This is very exciting. I will now add
here comes the vid.
To the Book of Faith.
Hello, everybody. If there isn't everybody, I'm not sure there is.
We shall soon find out.
If there's anybody there, feel free to leave a comment and say hello.
Okay, let's also put us on Facebook.
Yeah, I should probably put a tweet up, shouldn't I, for what it's worth?
I don't know if I can put us on Facebook. I might just go over to Facebook and put the YouTube link over there. Not wanting to do both. So let's do that.
Copy link.
And then at least everything will be in the same place. Are you putting us on Facebook?
I'm putting us on my Twitter feed.
Okay.
And shall I put that on the CNC feed as well?
Yes, please do. Yeah, that would be good. So there we go there. That's on my personal feed.
That's an existing account. Oh,
okay. Cooper and Cary. We're not going to be on Facebook.
What? Oh dear, what's the password? What's the Twitter password? That's annoying. It's probably Cooper and Cary 2020, I think.
Oh, what do you reckon?
I think it.
Well, whatever you do, don't say it live on the internet.
No.
I don't think it is that. So
of course it's not that. Yeah, hang on.
Yeah, but I genuinely think it isn't that.
No, actually, it isn't that. But sorry, I forgot. Yeah, it's all good. Okay, well, I might have to leave that to you then, because you can probably go straight in.
Yeah. No, I got the toggle open. So we're just finding our way. We're now live on YouTube for episode 100.
7 people watching now.
Great.
They're silently watching, though, silently judging. It's a good, nice place to be.
A bit judgy, you saying that they're judging. Maybe they're not judging. Maybe you're projecting your judgment onto their judginess.
It's true. That was very judgy of me.
Yeah. I certainly think so.
But then you were judging the judgy person being judgy.
I think I was. So there we all are on YouTube. I'm just
apologies to Tottenham and Liverpool fans who are missing the game in order to watch this.
I'm pretty sure they're not missing the game to watch this.
I am.
Oh, well, okay. So this is your projection for other people.
That's right. Well, I won't say the score, but it's not ideal for Tottenham fans at this moment in time.
I've now just hit record on this as well, because this obviously has to be recorded for the ages.
That's a good point. Yes, I need to get the old
record myself on Logic, and really putting my laptop through its paces here.
How's your laptop performing these days, James?
Well, obviously it completely crashes overnight whenever I leave it plugged in, but apart from that, excellent.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to spend 1,600 quid on a brand new laptop, then wanting it to not crash overnight is
I would have thought that was a fairly basic thing to look for.
Yeah. So that's a little bit frustrating.
Okay. Test. All right. So there we are. My Logic is running. So to preserve this for posterity.
This was a gift, not for the 100th, but because he's a very nice man, from Matthew Fisher of
Hello Mormonism fame.
Yes, indeed. And so I'm going to celebrate our 100th with single malt. And that is one of the legacies of lockdown, is that I didn't used to like single malt, or didn't think I did.
Right.
Turns out that I do.
I am quite a big fan. I very rarely have any in the house. I've only got look at that. That's great. I have this.
So it's a bit of a,
Yeah.
What have you got there?
I have got a nice glass of Italian red.
Okay.
Because the only whiskey I have in the house doesn't really count as whiskey, because it's Jack Daniels, which I think is only really fit to be mixed with Diet Coke.
Well, Yeah, people are. I'm discovering now that people have been quite rude about Jack Daniels. I actually bought some the other day, having never had any before.
Yeah.
And I bought it partly because I wanted to try it, but also it was the day that weekend. It was the Tennessee Titans for their playoff game, so I just thought, well, I'll at least follow the game or listen to it whilst drinking Jack Daniels, and we lost quite badly. So and I just drank Jack Daniels. I was just like, oh, this is all right. Yeah, I can get used to this.
Yeah.
So I did. Anyway, there is my drink, and I think we should firstly just get the celebrations out of the way. We have done 100 episodes. Cooper and Cary have words.
Yeah. It's so just before we crack into that, can we see our Facebook comments and our YouTube comments? Okay.
Yes, so I've for Facebook, I've just booted everyone over here to YouTube because for some
reason I can't
stream on both. It's not letting me. So,
very good.
Unless it's not going to let me do that. So there we are on. I'm rattling. Can you hear me rattle?
No, I'm not hearing you rattling. I thought.
Okay, no, I've just stopped the rattle.
A modicum of waffling, but that's all.
Well, it's 2 minutes past the hour, so we should probably start the episode, shouldn't we?
We should crack on. It's supposed to be live and direct, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Live and direct from Yeovil, Somerset, and also DeLand, Florida. It's Cooper and Cary have words. There's a first ever live episode.
I think it is
off Patreon, I guess. First ever live. Yeah, on Patreon we've done.
Yeah, we did a live one on Patreon, but here we are, and I'm drinking. What am I drinking? I'm drinking a single malt, unfiltered. From distilled at the Linkwood Distillery in 1998.
That's a really lovely gift.
Yeah.
Super. Absolutely. Has it got a sort of a peaty nose to it?
It's not as peaty as some of them. There are some that are so peaty they taste like surgical spirit.
Right. Yeah, that can be too much. The sort of turpentine school of
that's right.
Whiskey. Yeah, well, that's good. So you're starting to tick all the sort of cliched reformed boxes now. Have you started smoking cigars at all?
I haven't, but I do like it. I do like the idea of a cigar, and I like the smell of an unlit cigar. And
actually, the smell is great. The taste is really horrible, I think.
Yeah, I think
I went to a cigar bar not so long ago with a friend of mine in Chicago, who's quite a keen cigar smoker, and loved the smell. Like walking into the shop and smelling lovely. But as soon as I'm lighting up, it actually really makes me feel very sick indeed. Your mileage may vary, but I just can't get behind that aspect of reformed culture, I'm afraid. I've embraced the beard. I've embraced the, whatever else, the love of Carl Truman, but everything else.
I've just tried to leave a comment on our YouTube page, and it says, error, try again. Has leave us a comment appeared on the YouTube page? Can you see? I posted.
Oh, I'm getting an error message as well. That's weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not ideal.
Yeah. Is anyone having problems trying to? Obviously, they're not going to be able to
say anything,
are they?
Yeah, I wonder.
So try and leave us a message. Live chat.
Is there some sort of setting which means have we sort of closed comments or something like that?
No, don't think so.
No. Okay.
Didn't think we had.
Live chat. All messages available. Let's try. Yeah, error, try again. Sorry about this, chaps. Just to prove that it's live.
Absolutely. Don't know why it's not being kind to us.
And I'm logged in actually as Barry Cooper rather than Cooper and Cary, and it won't let me leave a comment, which is odd.
Restore chat. Error, try again. Can we chat? Not doing it. Nope.
Well, that's no good.
Tell you what, shall I log off of YouTube and log back on again? Would that be
it's worth a try.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I shall do some internet sleuthing and see if we can work out why that's happening.
If I undo it, maybe it'll start
Yeah.
So that's kind of annoying, isn't it? Oh, I can say my friend Tiffer has just got in touch and says he can hear but he can't comment.
Yeah, okay.
Which must be agony. How do we do something about that?
Is there another means by which we could share comments, like a different platform that people are on? Facebook's the only one I can really think of.
Well, I guess there's Twitter, obviously.
Yes.
You could leave us comments on Twitter, but that's
It's just-
assuming that everyone's on Twitter, of course.
You'd need an account, wouldn't you? And I suppose you need an account on
annoying.
Facebook, don't you?
So
that's
streaming
Hello, what was that?
tips. Why is it not? Tiffer says it's not agony not being able to comment.
It's nothing to do with ad blockers or something, is it?
I don't think so, because otherwise
Yeah.
other people wouldn't be having that problem.
Yeah.
So Tiffer says it is painful. However, it's all working fine, he says.
That's weird because it has worked previously when we've done this. Oh, look, Ruben Hunter's watching us. Bless him.
Working on another YouTube stream too. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So maybe we're having problems. Well, you could send us an email, cooperandcary@gmail.com would be an obvious place to go. So why don't you do that? This is not going as well as I'd hoped. Obviously, there's the Zoom chat, but people aren't actually on the Zoom, so that's probably not going to help as much as.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what? I think.
Is there any way of drawing people into a Zoom chat?
No, not really. Not without getting them actually on the Zoom. So.
Okay. Well, there we go.
So this is why we don't do stuff live more often, I guess. I don't know why we're not able to do messages.
The ability to leave comments is a choice the content creator has. They can select on each video if they want to allow comments or not. Well, that's usually
right. Not selected comments. We've got 3 thumbs up. That's very nice. Leave us a thumbs up. That'd be good.
Maybe we're just being censored by big tech. Maybe that's what's finally happened. They're coming to get us.
Kiffer reckons we can do a tiny URL via. Oh, I see. So people can just come straight into the Zoom.
Yeah.
Then we'll start to get pictures, and it'll then block up, and then you can just leave stuff on Zoom without. So yeah, I don't know. I think you're just going to have to email us, cooperandcary@gmail.com. That would be the thing to do.
That's a good idea. Okay.
And so maybe the chat will magically fix itself at some point. Let's try one more. Nope, still not going. We're not getting much help either. Subtitles, closed captions, settings, playback speed, subtitles. It's not giving us anything. Settings, no. Okay, I think this is probably suitably enraging people.
Yeah.
At the point where we just want to get going.
Fair enough.
Well, that's kind of disappointing, isn't it?
It is. We will have to work out what's happened off air and then do it again next time with some.
Yes. Paul also says these are people who know me on Facebook and so can message me directly.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you could leave comments on the Facebook page if you're able to. So either send us an email. Here we go. I think we'll just do that then, shall we? Send us an email or leave us a comment on our Facebook page. If you look for Cooper and Cary, that'll be the place to do it. Why don't you check in there and leave a comment, and then we'll see it. So,
or if you're a friend who actually has a phone number, then by all means send us a text message.
So Rachel Goodhart says, "Do you see comments on here?" And the answer is yes, we will.
Good.
So send us an email. You keep the emails looking at. I've got Facebook in front of me because you're
all right.
You're a Facebook refusenik.
Yeah, that's it. And then I finally took the plunge this year as well, James, or last year. Properly deleted my account, but also then in a fit of pique, nuked my Instagram account as well.
What?
Yeah, I know. It really was. I'm a bit of a all or nothing sort of person. I unfortunately go to extremes. You would say I fall off the other side of the horse. That's probably true.
Yeah, that's kind of mad. Well, I mean, having said all that, I mean, I think, well, actually, to be honest, I like Instagram. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, because you're always posting pictures of trees.
Yeah, but it seems to me that Twitter is not a happy place, and there's an awful lot of snipey amongst strangers, which is
I
a
can't
lot of
say
people
I've noticed, but yeah.
being wise after the event. If only they'd listened to me. I can't believe they did this. And look at the state of this kind of stuff.
Right.
On Facebook, people do that amongst their friends, which is, I think, in some ways even more toxic.
Yeah.
You do get some positivity, but on Instagram, there's an awful lot of, hey, look at this. Hey, you know what I mean? There's an element.
It is more positive, definitely.
Yeah, I think there's just a positive vibe to Instagram that I quite like. So I'm and therefore whenever I see something I like the look of, which is usually a tree or a parish church, I take a picture, and that's sort of it, really.
Yeah. And I think that was partly the reason for me, is that my inclination is to post pictures of my kids because I just, obviously love them to bits. But then I started thinking, I don't know whether that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And they probably won't thank me for it when they get old enough to hurl abuse at their old man.
I don't put pictures of my kids on social media. That's kind of my...
Yeah, it's a good rule.
They can't, they haven't agreed to it.
Yes.
And also, their
agent hasn't signed off on it.
Also, I just deleted all of my Facebook information. You can actually do that. I really went. There's a thing you can do if you dig deep. Maybe I'll try and dig out a link. And there was about 2 gigs worth of information on me, most of which was pictures that I'd posted over the last 14 years or something.
Yeah.
But yeah. So Rachel on Facebook is saying, "Am I standing up?" To which the answer is yes. I am actually standing, and I record every episode standing up. I record every podcast now standing up. I have one of those. I don't have an uppy downy desk, but I've got a thing on the desk that is uppy downy.
Yes.
And so I have all day meetings on standing up. I had a 4-hour meeting on Tuesday for the National Safeguarding Steering Group, and I stood.
And you were able to steer while standing.
Steer.
Yes, it was a steering group. So
yes.
The standing didn't affect the steering.
No. There was probably even some backseat driving at one point, but yes, it was.
Okay, good.
It was absolutely fine.
I've got a movable desk. Right, it goes up and down. I've never really moved it up because I don't have the urge to stand up particularly. I spend enough time standing up. I like to be sitting down as much as possible, which is where you currently find me. But I think there's something to be said for thoughts do tend to flow a bit more quickly when you're sort of there's nothing better than walking around the block for clearing the cobwebs out of the old headspace. So there's something to be said for that, I think.
Yeah, but anyway, I've been standing for a year or two.
Not literally, but
yes, almost entirely. In fact,
right. Yeah.
I sleep standing up.
Yes,
actually, that's not true. I sleep standing on my head.
And you can sleep on planes, can't you? You're one of those infuriating people.
Oh no, I'm not that good. I can just about,
right.
but I'm not a particularly good one. So I'm just making sure that we don't have any more comments coming through on my instant message. So anyway, if you want to leave us a message, it's great to have you. Click a like on Facebook, on YouTube as well. 26 of you are watching. We can't get the comments to work. If any of you know how to get comments to work, that'd be great. Send us an email, cooperandcary@gmail.com, and also go over to our Facebook page, and I'm monitoring that. So it'd be great to hear from you during the show. So we've got a mailbag.
I was going to say, and Matty Webber has just emailed us, or certainly today, to ask if I'll be dusting off my rendition of Being Alive by Stephen Sondheim. Probably not is the answer to that. There's a reason why I'm not currently in musical theatre.
Yeah.
I like to restrict my singing to just really bellowing into the ears of the people standing immediately in front of me at church. And I think that's enough. I don't think I need to be paid for that or in any way remunerated. It's its own reward.
I see you mainly on stage doing, either comedy, but with a very straight face, or doing stuff by Russians.
Funnily enough, that was one of my final shows. I played Chekhov in a play called Chekhov in Yalta.
Right.
Actually, not by a Russian writer, but playing a Russian writer. And yes, it did have the benefit as an actor of being completely impassive.
Right.
And being very physically undemonstrative, which I felt was a good fit for me.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, I didn't get an agent out of that final show. That has to be said. But eventually I got one.
Let's take the mailbag.
Yes. Okay. So let's see. Thank you, Kazito, for joining us, and Tim as well. Just picking out some of these emails that are just coming through. It's another being alive comment. Sorry about this, James. You're going to have to chip in with songs that maybe you feel liable to sing at any moment. Casito says, I was listening to Being Alive, staring out of my window. The grey, misty, glorious wetness in Plymouth today. Need to say, I put the song on replay. If Barry's singing voice is half as distant as his narrating one, well, I shouldn't read that out. That's like a backhanded compliment, isn't it? That's being nice to myself. But thank you for Casito. That's a very kind comment. Casito is one of our esteemed patrons, and which is a lovely community. I was going to say, tying into what you were saying earlier, James, about Twitter being a bit of a dumpster fire. One of the things I've learned this year through that happy band of patrons is that actually online community, although it's not the same obviously as being in the same room or the same church, it can be a really sweet and warm and nurturing. It's very nurturing and really, it's a good thing. And so that restored, I don't want to say it completely restored my faith in humanity, because #totes deprav. But it was good. It certainly warmed the cockles of my heart. So that was good.
It's good to have your hearts warming.
Strangely warmed, as I believe your cockles are currently being strangely warmed by that lovely whiskey you've got there.
It certainly is.
Look at that. Are you actually, is this product placement? Are you sure you're not being paid for this?
I am not, no. But
Okay.
if you're listening and you're in and you'd like some kind of
it's a wasted opportunity, really.
Prominence, then that's fine. Hey, it's YouTube. The rules, we make up the rules for now.
For now. Mm-hmm.
And also, if you burst into song, it'll probably just shut us down, the algorithm, if it recognizes what you're singing, Barry, of course.
Unlikely.
Have permission to actually sing that. So we've got an episode 100 question here.
Oh, good.
We go to the very top of our notes. We do have some notes.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, but we do.
Yeah.
Well,
go on, you read it.
Well, you mean from Dan via Twitter? Or so our friend Dan, I think it's okay to say his Twitter handle because he'd appreciate the followers. His friends.
You're making him sound needy now. That's not okay. We're the needy ones.
His friends know him as Dan Steele 77. I think probably his close family call him that as well. But he said, "What have you learnt?" And he's put "learnt" within asterisks there. It's very loaded. What have you learnt from doing the first 100 episodes? James, I'm not sure I like the learnt emphasis there. It's like he's saying, all right, you two have been banging on for roughly 100 hours now, the equivalent of 4 solid days. Have either of you actually learned anything from this whole regrettable interlude? James, have you learned anything? Have you learned nothing?
Not Dan Steele 77s. Is that
That's
correct?
right, Dan Steele 77. And let's face it, he always has something sensible to say. But James, do you have you learned anything at all from this whole sorry interlude?
I think one of the things we went through a phase of an awful lot came down to predestination, didn't we?
Do you mean just talking about it all the time?
Yeah, by which I mean that how you see things down the line, kind of, you go, well, that all depends on how you feel about the other thing, and then the other thing, and then the other thing.
We thought it was all connected.
Yeah, and I think I've really appreciated in the last sort of 2 or 3 years that there is a beauty to Christian orthodoxy, but also a pragmatic one. With the moment you start pulling on a thread, it basically is going to completely unravel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an element of kind of all or nothing about it. And that's not to say that therefore there is a set position on end times or creationism or baptism necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But actually the core doctrines are core for a reason. And actually everything does connect to everything else. And the moment you deny one thing, you start playing theological whack-a-mole.
And do you think predestination falls into that category?
Well, I think it does, because I don't think I think Arminianism just takes you straight to open theism, which I think is
to a different God.
I just think you're then quite a long way from where the Bible actually is, but at least it's consistent with itself.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many people have now just stopped watching enraged already.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
No, and again, this is a good point as any to say what we quite often say on the podcast, which is, if you are joining us for the first time, especially, we embrace the diversity of views that many people have, and we like it when people disagree with us. I especially like it when people disagree with James. So just we like that because it's good to be challenged, isn't it? Otherwise we all end up in our little bubbles, not really being challenged on anything. And actually it's really good when somebody just says completely, without any guile at all, why do you believe in the sovereignty of God, or the whatever it is, total depravity? Like, it doesn't really make any sense to me. It's like, that's a really good question,
But also I'm really impressed by the people do email us and they explain in advance what they think very graciously. And then it just makes me think, blimey, how many episodes have you listened to? Surely this is infuriating to you. I had a lovely email from a fellow in Australia called Mark, who is a doctor there. I think he's born in Britain. And he was pushing back about some of our comments about the NHS when they were clapping about the NHS. I think that was sort of back in May. And I would say that I, in particular, have pretty robust views about the NHS. In fact, in my book,
that's
Death by Civilization, I'm just
21 minutes, first reference to book.
Good job. In my book, Death by Civilization, I wrote, I can no longer hold public office because of the chapter I'm about to write, which is that I don't actually believe in the NHS. So that's kind of the big taboo. And he kind of pushed back very robustly, completely legitimately. But he said at the top of that email, he said, non-Calvinist, and therefore often don't agree with you on a fair amount of things. And I just thought, great that people give us the benefit of the doubt for quite a long time.
Fair play.
But just to finish that thought, he just said, so we were kind of a bit dubious about clapping. And he said, yes, when people feel forced to clap, it isn't great and they should feel free not to clap. I won't mind, but I do think being grateful is something I've learned to cultivate in this health crisis. I'm grateful for God, for the healthcare system and workers here in Oz, far from being safe so far, for being safe so far, having a garden. For my atheist friends, they are grateful about the same things, minus God being the source of these things. And he says, it's worth noting the input Christians have had over time into what became the NHS, which is completely fair. And for a lot of history, Christians have been papering over the cracks of an uncaring society and molding society to get to the point where we value each individual. Are we there yet? No, but I think you'd say we are treating children better than we did when Dr. Bernardo was around. Fair. Therefore, and I said back to him, I just emailed him privately as well, just to say, if your biggest problem in society is griping about a socialized healthcare system that is free at the point of use for everyone, then you're probably doing all right.
It's not bad, is it?
You know what I mean? That's a nice problem to have, which is, could we provide universal healthcare better? Whereas this was not something that was universally available and hasn't been for the vast majority of human history.
That's a very good observation. He said also in his email, maybe you might want to have a comment on this, James. He says, I'll close with a final thought or even an idea for a further episode. A better one than we're doing now, obviously.
It's fun for another episode.
Would the salvation...
That whole series of those other episodes. It's going to be amazing.
Good. Never let it be said we don't have catchphrases. Of course we do. Would the Salvation Army still be as respected for the changes it achieved if it were Calvin's army? I.e., does Calvinism / Reformed theology cause its proponents to be less involved with the works side of the gospel? Is it due to an overemphasis on grace that therefore works are seen as quasi-dirty?
Wow.
Quasi-dirty. I wasn't expecting to say that word today, but it's a good one.
It's a good word. And also the phrase Calvin's army. That's kind of a frightening... they certainly sound disciplined.
Yeah, that's right. Totally depraved army marching around. What do you think? Do you think it's? I think
it's a fair point.
Do you?
Yeah. But actually, weirdly, this kind of chimes in with. I preached a sermon on Sunday morning from Revelation 2, and it was extremely pleasing because it's one of the easiest parts of Revelation to preach. If you ignore who the angel of the church is and you don't worry too much about the tree of life in verse 7.
That's like saying the easiest part of quantum physics, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but this one really is straightforward. And it's saying to the church in Ephesus, Jesus says to the church in Ephesus, you've got really good works and you're persevering in those works. And you are doctrinally discerning. So when super apostles rock up or people claiming to be apostles, you basically send them packing.
Hmm.
And you hate the works of the Nicolaitans, but you've lost your first love. So that's where that comes from. And I was really mindful of the fact that a proper church, and again, we find it very hard to think anything other than individualistically. A proper church has people who contend for the truth and has people who do good works. And we tend to veer one way or the other.
Yes. Sort of by nature, by wiring.
Yeah. And
you think?
Yeah, and I think that's good. No one's off the hook for one or the other. So you still need good doctrine, good works, and you still pull your weight if you're doctrinal and you're preaching and teaching, whatever. So I think in a way we just need to be mindful of the fact that the church is something that we need to be rejoicing in, because of everyone's given different gifts and different emphases, and we can rejoice in that. And I think Calvinism and the way the Reformation has worked out, coupled with 21st century individualism, gives you me and my Bible, and that the church is a group of Christians that I regularly turn up to and may sometimes be accountable to. So I think our poor ecclesiology has made Calvinists not prone to be a Salvation Army. Is that fair? Do you think?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm, as somebody who interned under Mark Dever for a while, I'm inclined to say bad ecclesiology is under a lot of things that are messed up in the church. But it's very interesting, that comment. Is it due to an overemphasis on grace? I don't know. Can you overemphasize grace? I'm not convinced that you can. What I would say is, and I think this was probably part of Luther's argument at the time of the Reformation, if you're not doing works, if you're not doing good works, then you don't need less grace. You need more grace, because you haven't really understood that grace motivates you to do good works. And that, because of course that was the major Roman Catholic, that was the argument of the church back at Luther. You're talking about grace, grace, grace all the time, and you just need faith, and it's all about grace, grace, grace. But if you say that to people, then they're going to stop doing good works. And Luther's argument was, no. You've misunderstood what grace is. That if you understand that, if you fully understand what grace is, then you love God. Your heart goes out to God so much that it also goes out to other people, and will necessarily result in good work. So I would argue that for those so-called Calvinists who are not doing good works, it's not because they need less grace, it's because they actually need to understand it better than they currently do. Shrewd
and astute. And I can't improve on that, and I'm not going to.
Should we talk about something else here? Let's have a look. Well, one thing I was going to ask you before we get to another question. Apparently in the US TV industry, 100 episodes is the traditional threshold, I learned today, for a television series to enter syndicated reruns. Now, you're a television sitcom aficionado, obviously. What are syndicated reruns? What does that mean?
So I don't think it's 100.
Okay.
And let me explain why I'm going to come up with a different number.
This is a US. This was on Wikipedia, by the way, just to show the depth of my research.
Okay. So let's just go with there's 65 and there's 91.
Right.
Historically, maybe 100 has currency now, but previously. So in order to become profitable, a show was usually made at a loss, and was then stored up and then sold to be syndicated, which meant sold in bulk to run on channels that were not the mainstream ABC, NBC, CBS channels.
Yeah.
So cable, all the other channels, and they would buy 65 episodes or 91 episodes of something. You would buy, so 65 is a magic number, because that means that for 13 weeks you can run a new episode for every weekday. That's 5 times 13.
Got it.
Or 91 is 7 times 13. So a quarter of the year you've got at 8 o'clock every day. Boom, that number.
Yeah, makes sense.
So so there are various magic numbers historically. Now, what streaming does with all that, I literally do not know.
Yes.
But
it's probably an old discussion, isn't it? But
this is where numbers get really big, really fast, and that's where Seinfeld ends up being having hundreds of millions of dollars, because the rights to 186 episodes of Seinfeld, or however many there were, is worth a lot of money.
100 episodes of a podcast, not so much. But Ben Daniel wonders if we've received a telegram from the Queen. No, I mean, I haven't received anything. Have you? I haven't checked the mailbox today, to be fair. But
I've not. No, I don't know. It could be on one of my other email addresses or something like that. It may be flopping around outside. Let's just assume that it's there somewhere, and I'll discover it tomorrow morning.
I was also not named in the New Year's honors list, which I think.
Well, it's because you went away, Barry.
Surprised a lot of people that did, but anyway.
Went away.
Chris Wells sent a really good email about boredom.
Their names, but I don't think
I'm doing so well so far. I've already outed somebody, one of my friends in the UK. Hello. About boredom. Hi both. You mentioned in your most recent episode that you may appreciate suggestions of topics for future podcasts. Conversation with friends recently led me to wonder whether there might be some mileage in a discussion of boredom stroke boringness.
Okay. Can I just interject there and say, what sort of discussion was this? Was this a discussion about boredom, or was this a discussion that was so boring it made you think, I wonder if Cooper and Cary could, A, talk about boredom, or B, match this level of boredom? I mean, the first 15 minutes of us broadcasting, fiddling around with comments, I mean, that must have got close.
That's what I thought. What I pictured in my mind was that Chris was sitting there with his friends, having all sat there listening to an episode of Cooper and Cary, and then someone said, anyone have any questions based on that? And then Chris said, well, not really, but it did put me in mind to talk about boredom. This is what I imagine happened. Anyway, he continues. Is it wrong to be boring? Is it wrong to be bored? Or is there some value in being boring? Sounds like a cue for a song, if you heard the last episode about my favorite records. Does the cultural mandate require that Christians make the most of the world we live in and thereby be interesting / interested? What do you reckon? That's such a good question. James, what do you think on that?
I'm not sure. One thing leaps to mind is that there's an awful lot of thing in parenting books about trying to get your children to be bored, because that's when they'll start to do things for the first time, discover, make their own fun, be original. So if you're constantly
being interesting,
stimulating them with stuff, then in a way they don't have to do the hard work. They're being stimulated rather than stimulating.
Interesting. Okay.
So I think there is something in that. And occasionally I have, as a parent, noticed my children are bored, and I've resisted the urge to offer to play a game with them or do something. And it's actually really
terrible comments on Twitter now, like that guy who talked about teaching his daughter to use a tin opener.
Yeah. Let's not get into what I've.
Let's not get into that. Yeah.
With sharp knives, but I've sort of resisted the urge, because I just sort of think, I wonder what they'll do next, because they don't get bored that often, and they're pretty good at finding things to do and not being dependent on screens and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, but occasionally I just think, I'm going to see where this leads, and keep it. And then maybe after a while I'll just go, hey, do you want to play a game or do something?
Does it work?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes, and occasionally I don't know. They just sort of disappear for a while and come back, and they did something. I don't need to know everything. I mean, when I think about how I was parented, I was the youngest of 4, and I lived on a farm. I think I was, broadly speaking, ignored. I think I used to watch.
Were you ever bored?
Yeah,
on the farm?
Yeah, a bit. But also, I used to play word games with my mum in the afternoons. We used to watch Countdown and then play Scrabble. So
now it's all starting to make sense. Okay,
Cooper and Cary have words.
I get it.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
Waited 100 episodes to drop that bombshell.
Yeah. So
nice
and also often do crosswords after meal times.
Wow.
But overall, we were sort of left to do our own thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's really interesting about not being too interesting for your kids. I have to say, I don't think that's a danger that I particularly have as a parent, but
What?
that's
Yeah,
being too interesting. But that's good. I think my wife and my daughter might actually be watching this downstairs as we speak. So there you go. Parenting tip there, Lee. Get on it. Stop being interesting.
ignore your kids.
Yeah, start ignoring those kids.
I really think that. I really do.
Yeah.
I really do think that, because you want to prepare them for a life without you, as it were. Give them
Sure.
roots, give them wings.
Well, this is taking a cheery turn, but yeah.
But you just want to give them, give them the skills to kind of make up a game, do their own thing.
Tools for life. Yeah.
Tools for life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've definitely read books which just sort of say, don't, like when you're watching your kids playing, try to resist the urge to sort of intervene too much. Let them just sort of, yeah. And it's a similar kind of principle, I think. Leave room for the imagination and all that. I would say, I don't know, my one thought on this was, there's probably good boring and bad boring. Most of us have been on the receiving end of bad boring, which is somebody who is so on a hobby horse about something, they just want to kind of monologue at you about the same, let's say, predestination for the sake of argument, constantly like banging on about it, and you're not reading the room and the person's eyes, like you've cornered them at a party or whatever. I don't go to parties anymore. I'm 49 years old, but I used to. But that's obviously bad boring. But there's a sort of good boring, isn't there? Which is, and I think one of the definitions of the good life in Scripture, a lot of people would say that just sounds really boring. I'm thinking here of, the one you often talk about, James, mind your own business, resolve to love God, love your family, love your brothers and sisters in the local church.
Yeah.
A lot of people would just say, that's very unambitious. That's really parochial. Like, don't you want to get out of that kind of mentality? That's boring. And actually, it's, I mean, the most thrilling thing that's happened, maybe this speaks to my life, but the most thrilling thing that's happened to me over the past 2 years has been watching my 2-year-old daughter, now 2, learn to walk and learning to speak. Just being down on her level and watching that kind of stuff happening. Really, really small stuff. It's not going to make any headlines. It's not going to make a name for anyone, but it's not boring. It's like the last thing you would call it. It's boring. So yeah.
There's no biblical injunction to be interesting. I think there's something about your conversation being seasoned with salt, but I think that's the gospel rather than And I just worry, in particular, with regard to discipling young people. There's an awful lot of youth ministry that is essentially saying to kids, "Go and change the world."
Yeah. Be radical.
Yeah, it's like, no, just be a Christian. That's hard enough. And also, you're not asked to change the world.
You already have Christ. Just be a Christian.
You're not. That position of savior has been taken. So I just think, and also not everybody is inspired by that message. So I just think there's always that there's a uniformity within church, particularly church circles, that your children should think certain things or do certain things. One of the things, here's a bit of a sidebar. There's always a constant pressure to get your kids to do stuff in the church service. And wouldn't it be great if they said the prayers, or if they did the thing or did that? To which my answer is, no, not really. I mean, in a way, we're a family, and so therefore we all want to get involved. But one of my kids does not want to do that, and I am basically planning to never make her do that, because I don't think it's a requirement. And an adult who doesn't want to do it is never made to do it. So I don't quite know why we're twisting kids' arms to do stuff up the front. We want to give them the opportunity to do stuff in the appropriate way, but there's often quite a lot of pressure to essentially turn your kids into extroverts.
Yeah, I can see something in that. Although at my church, they used to indulge us by allowing us to do, and I cringe as I even think of it, to do like comedy sketches during the service. I don't know why. Again, poor ecclesiology. They let us do that. But one thing that was great was they allowed me to do Bible readings from time to time. And I do think that's one of the reasons I sort of ended up getting into the profession and the biz and into this, doing what we're doing now. So hey, it wasn't all bad, was it? Yes, it was. So
I
many
love it
people.
when people call it the biz. And also, people keep referring to the BBC as the Beeb. I never call it the Beeb. I've never called it that. Apart from,
Too familiar?
well, I don't know. It's just like, it just feels a bit naff. I don't know. It's the BBC, and it's like,
Auntie
maybe
Beeb is very Terry Wogan.
yeah, I think so. And there's an affection. It may be that from outside the BBC, historically at least, not so much now, there's been a lot of affection for the BBC, and they call it Auntie Beeb. The moment you work for the BBC, you realize it's sort of a pretty graceless organization, full of fairly demoralized and demotivated people.
Right. So Auntie just feels too cozy, comfy for you.
I think so, yeah.
Like calling chemotherapy chemo.
Well, I guess so, yeah. I mean,
I'd agree.
Well, it's not for anyone not undergoing chemo to call it chemo. You don't get to call it chemo. Is it? Are you having chemo? No. I get if I'm having chemo, I can call it that.
Yeah, far too chummy.
How do we keep talking about chemo? This is nuts.
No, it was a sidebar to your sidebar. We've now got two.
I'm being given
a
stick by Tim, by the way, Tim Vasby Burney, for having ice in my whiskey.
Yeah, well, I'd not noticed that. You're right, Tim. That's a disgrace. Ken.
Is that not cool?
No, that's not in a quality malt. I mean,
but you sometimes have water with whiskey, and that's okay.
Yeah, that might be okay, I suppose.
So the ice is just sort of melting into the whiskey.
Yeah, I just think that's not. I don't know. It's not quite as bad as mixing it with Sprite or something, but yeah.
Fanta,
Mountain Dew, as we have over here, which is just the abomination that causes desolation. James, here's a question that's come in from Stephen. Stephen doesn't have a surname because I've deliberately left it off. Am I right in thinking you mentioned a number of episodes ago? By the way, I haven't vetted this email. I'm just reading it straight out. So it could be. I don't know how this sentence is going to end.
Pull the trigger. Let's see what happens.
I'll tell you what, that's the kind of we're living on the edge here, guys.
Totally,
This is what two men in their 40s. This is what constitutes fun.
Our 40s.
Am I right in thinking you mentioned a number of episodes ago about astrology and the gospel? Maybe when you talked about the seasons and time. Could you elaborate on that? Or maybe I just imagine you didn't imagine it, Stephen. He totally talked about it. Would you care to elaborate on it? I
probably banged on about it a bit on the Patreon on the video afterwards. I just read a book about the life of John Dee, who was an astrologer in Elizabethan times, and it was really interesting. So I don't know where it gets me particularly, but it's one of those things where it was a bit of astrology felt like a bit of a dirty secret amongst sort of church circles and the circles of power, but at the same time, it was one of those. It's weird. So, for example, John Dee was probably one of the most learned men in England, anyway, and they thought they knew that the planets and the stars have significance, and that that astrology had a part to play in wisdom, but they didn't quite know what it was. But, for example, the day on which the Queen was going to be crowned, that matters. So pick a day. So they asked him to say what is the most auspicious day on which, right. And it would be like, well, for goodness sake, whatever you do, don't do it on a Friday. Well, why not? Yes. Fridays are bad luck.
Sure.
Are they? And actually, you can know Matthew Fisher, who kindly got me this. He's looked at baptismal records about people being baptized on different days.
Oh, interesting.
And there is a big thing about being baptized on this day and not that day. So
right.
I don't think
the church was endorsing this kind of
Church of England, until probably at least 100 years ago as well.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah. So there are days of the week on which you do these things, and yet we just think, well, obviously there aren't, except there are, because you rest on the Sabbath.
Right.
So clearly,
but then people would say that that's not nothing to do with the planets, is it?
Well, no, but there is an order that God has made to the universe.
It's a creation, right?
A creation that you do certain things on certain days and you don't do other things on other days.
Yes.
And then there are feast days as well.
Right.
So
and we've already determined that by the
So we've already seeded the principle that some days are special and others aren't.
Right.
So it's not unreasonable to take that on. Now, I don't know how far you can, but that they did. And there was a point at which, when they were doing it, they just thought, this doesn't feel right.
And also, I suppose you had using the North Star as a navigation, for example. I mean, it's like, okay, so they are telling us something then, the planets and the stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they're not balls of gas. I mean, they are balls of gas, but, we don't want to be the Eustace Scrub who says from the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but stars are just massive are big, it's a burning gas. Is that, no, that's what they're made of. That's not what they are.
Yeah.
So there is a link in the Bible between the stars and heavenly beings.
Mm-hmm.
So we sort of, but what that does mean, I don't really know.
And where you draw the line in terms of what the Old Testament talks about when it talks about the wickedness of divination and whether there's any connection. Yeah.
So John Dee spent a lot of time, especially towards the end of his life, trying to summon angels to talk to them. And he found one or two people who could apparently summon angels.
Wow.
Who, at least one of whom proved at the time to be fraudulent.
This doesn't constitute pastoral advice, by the way.
No. But it's kind of like why I've been digging into it. But then you hear what the angel is saying. It was Michael or Uriel or one of the, Uriel's not mentioned in scripture, but in tradition. And when you discover what the angels are saying, you just go, well, that isn't consistent with scripture. So they're either making it up or that's demonic.
Yeah.
That's not an angel. And what they're doing is not appropriate for Christians to be doing. So you've gone wrong there.
Yeah.
But to say, therefore, that the whole thing is nonsense and it doesn't matter what you do on any day, including the Sabbath. Well, that's wrong too. But I don't know where to go from there.
Okay. So there we are. I think that hopefully that's scratched where you're itching, Stephen, a little bit.
Probably not. It's probably raised way more questions than it's solved.
Can of worms. That's what we do on this podcast. So Jessica has commented, or sent us an email, just following up on our boring discussion, our conversation about the concept of boring, not our boring discussion, as if it could be. I know adults that demand to be entertained constantly by their friends, which I find exhausting and really irritating. And they're actually pretty boring people because they don't seem to have their own interests. They're the same people who struggle to connect with people, even though they want to be around them all the time. Their lack of having their own interests makes them unable to connect to others. That's an interesting point. And something else connected to that, I think, is it's hard for somebody to be boring if they're genuinely interested in other people.
Yeah.
If you're a really good listener, and actually you don't need to say very much, but if you're a really good listener, I'm not saying I've cracked the code on this, by the way, but nobody thinks that somebody who listens to them really carefully is boring. So I think a lot of it maybe is that we feel, I've got to talk.
Yeah.
And actually that can do quite the opposite and make us very boring.
I have no idea what that feels like, just talking and talking. I don't know what that is.
You wouldn't naturally, you wouldn't.
No.
I'm saying hypothetically, some people.
Okay, I'm saying right. Okay,
yeah. Just some people out there who might be,
that's right.
But
Facebook, I've got one on Facebook here.
Go on.
Which chimes with that. Andy says boring people get bored as well. I think there's some truth in that.
We were never being boring because we were never being bored. That's a quote from a Pet Shop Boys record that I happen to quite like.
Those guys just keep on giving. And also Tim, who told me off about the ice, says most Christians in history have lived boring lives, surely. Born in a village, farmed there all their life, rarely traveled far, died and were buried in the churchyard, whichever they went to.
Yeah.
We get that all this choice we have is very modern.
That's true. That's very true. And another thing is, how can you be bored if you see things as they really are? This is another thing you learn off kids, the way that they can be completely captivated by the slant of sunlight across the rug or the steam coming out of the humidifier. Like, okay, that's a good way to look at the world. Because when you think about it, sunlight and steam, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And just the fact that anything exists is surely and magical and fascinating. Mm-hmm. So I think probably it's one of those unfortunate things that we learn not to find interesting as we get older, because maybe we think, oh yeah, we've explained that. Science has explained it. Well, yeah, but it's like your point. Yeah, that's what it is. It's water droplets becoming, but it's, and the atoms, vibrating, but it's not, doesn't really get at the heart of why this exists and the sort of response that it calls forth in us. So,
and I think also we just underplay we take for granted so quickly. Nate Wilson children's author who's written books called like 100 Cupboards and
Yeah.
Ashtown somethings, Burials, something like that. I read the first 100 Cupboards book and to my kids and liked it. It felt like it skewed towards boys a bit, and so they didn't go for the second one quite so much. But they're well written and they're excellent. But he says whenever he does talk, there's a really good talk he gave, or he's being interviewed somewhere, it's on the internet somewhere. He talks about how the worlds that he creates are every bit as magic as the world that we live in, because the world that we live in is magic. And he says, he tells this to kids in schools or whatever. And he says, look, if you don't believe the world is magic, I arrived here in a huge flying metal tube. You know what I mean? It's just like, how much more magic do you want? I'm talking to you in Florida. I'm in England, and people in Plymouth and Shrewsbury and London and Florida and other places are watching this seconds after we've said it.
We are able to bore people literally all over the world. I mean, the magic of that.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Absolute dynamite.
But actually, in a way, I've just been reading the kids book. You see, kids get this. Kids have that sense of wonder.
Yeah.
I'm nearly through the 4th book of the Wingfeather saga, which is the Andrew Peterson series. Brilliant, really, really good. And it's now towards the end of the 4th book, and it's just like, I can't believe that's just happened, and I have no idea how they're going to get out of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Really exciting. Yeah. But one of the things that happens is that you've got people who can sort of communicate with each other remotely, but via kind of music and a slightly magical sort of sense. And you just go, I mean, that's just phones, isn't it? And rather than just go, that magic is just phones. I mean, why can't we say phones are magic? Because they are, aren't they? I mean, that's like, the rattly, just this microphone here, here's what you says and can send it through the air to what?
Yeah, I know.
Magic.
Yeah. Who is it who said that? And I think this is the reverse point, and I think they get it badly wrong.
Yeah.
Somebody said, to any sufficiently advanced technology seems like magic.
Yeah.
So, but actually it kind of is. Like the implication of that was like, oh, well, because we're uncivilized, like savage people, you show them a wheel and they're all like, oh, but actually it kind of is magical. I mean, the fact that we exist and we can create stuff. Music, another one, based on the last couple of episodes, we've talked about the music we love. It still staggers me that you can listen to a particular arrangement of sort of different vibrating frequencies and it makes you cry, or it makes you feel elevated to, as it were, to a transcendent place. I mean,
or it takes you back to when you were 9, or
it's just, I mean, to me that is magical. And sure, it's this, that, and the other, stuff you with your science. I get it, but it doesn't really explain.
That's the clean version of Bill Burr.
That one's for you, Ruben.
I love this Chesterton quote. I must have quoted it before about magical creatures, mythical creatures. It is one thing to describe an interview with a gorgon or a griffin, a creature who does not exist. It is another thing to discover that the rhinoceros does exist and then take pleasure in the fact that it looks as if he didn't.
Who's that?
What does that mean? I mean, that's
really.
I mean,
that's great.
That's just like, you look at a rhino and you just think, what?
Yeah.
That's real. And then you look at a made-up beast and you think, yeah, sure. Yeah. But
I wonder whether again, I realize it's not like us, we're being very circuitous here, but I wonder whether one of the reasons why we get bored at things is because we're always thinking about the destination. And I know I'm going to come off here like I'm sort of, I don't know, the Big Lebowski or something, but like you're stuck in traffic jam.
Yeah, for the Big Lebowski.
That's for another episode. But like you're stuck in traffic. Why do you find that boring? Or you're put on hold by technical support. Why does that feel boring? It's because it sort of feels like an imposition. It's getting in the way of the real stuff that I need to get to. But actually, what if that thing was the actual stuff that you are in, and it's important? God wants you in that moment. which we believe he does, I think if we embrace that way of looking at things, it's hard to see stuff like that as boring, because it's not an imposition. It's actually where God wants you at that moment, and is trying to get you to slow down. I don't know, it could be one of a million things, but it's not boring.
Yeah. And also it is the now and the not yet, which I was reminded of that this week in my house group. And we watched a video, one of the God's Big Picture, Vaughan Roberts series. We just that as a just in our house group, as in terms of we watch the video on our own, as it were, and then talk about it for a little while. And the 8th one is very much about the last days, which we're in now, not as in Revelation last days, but the last days. And, the now and the not yet, and we're living in this sort of bit here. And you just think that Jesus tells a lot of parables about waiting and not yet, and living in that bit between. There are an awful lot of parables are essentially a man went off on a journey, and before he went, he said to this person, do this when I return. And then when he returns, it's just like, what fresh hell is this? What are you doing? Take him out and kill him in front of me. It's just like, I wish I was making that bit up. But yeah, no, it is. So in a way, we constantly think about the destination. We think about, the end. When's everything going to be better? Which more so now than ever, because people look at the world around them and it's dysfunctional and messy, and they're furious.
Right.
Really, really furious about it.
Yeah.
And
because the present is messed up, and they have no sense of is that the kind of
and that's why therefore they want a strong man president. And actually, it struck me particularly. I read somewhere that Joe Biden has signed more executive orders in his first week than the other 4 previous first week signage combined. So he's just spent an awful lot of time, as I think James White says, shakily signing on the, it's just right. I can barely hold a pen, let's be honest. But it struck me that the Democrats despised Trump as the strong man. It's like, no, you like strong men. You just want it to be your strong man.
A different sort of strong man.
Yeah. And the Republicans shouldn't have wanted a strong man either. And if you're ruling by executive order, then you're in real trouble there. I mean, that's not healthy.
Right.
So that's why I think
it's like a husband saying to his wife, "You will respect me." You've kind of lost the,
the
relationship at that point, right?
Yeah, but it's the impatience of I demand perfection, and this is the shortest route to my version of utopia. And I know we want to do an episode on essentially
utopias. Yeah. That's a very good point.
What else?
Andrew sent a really good, I think it was an email. I'd love to hear what the two of you think about the idea of minimalism. Again, what I imagine has happened here in Andrew's life is he sat around, obviously in a big group of people listening to an episode of our podcast, James. And then he said to everyone at the end, any thoughts on that, anyone? And somebody said, do you know what? It's a very good argument for doing very short things, isn't it? They could have, what if they took this idea and just did it in about 3 minutes? I think it would be better. Anyway, he continues, it seems to be a more and more popular lifestyle today, probably because the world is becoming more and more hectic. I've never really heard what Christians have to say about this idea of living with less, living with a more simple life. Most of the proponents of minimalism these days are YouTubers living in LA, right? Probably they don't really have much choice. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about, particularly if we look at it through the lens of the Gospels. It's also quite appropriate for a discussion on rush/hurry, don't you think?
Yeah.
What do you think on that? What do you reckon? Minimalism for Christians, is that a good way to go?
My gut when I read this was, this feels like a problem that rich people have.
Right.
But then I just thought also, yeah, but we're rich though, aren't we? So we should probably.
It is our problem, yeah.
Yeah, it's always very easy to say this is first world problems, which is, well, I'm not actually that rich, so it's like, well, okay, if you earn a median income in the UK, you are one of the richest people in human history.
Right.
You have, here I am talking to you on a laptop. I've got an iPad over there. I've got a phone over here. I've got access to all the information in the world now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I own the Library of Alexandria. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
So I think,
and yet, James Cary, and yet,
you
in
know,
some ways, are you not poor? In other ways,
well, I mean, look at me as well. I probably own too many books.
Yeah, that goes without saying.
I mean, those are the only ones I can bear to show people.
Yeah.
So, you know, you should see the number of books over there and on the floor piled up there and over there.
Yeah. Okay.
I just think we do have a problem with stuff. So I do think there's something healthy in the minimalist movement.
Yes.
Because we do easily place our confidence in stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there was a huge wave of programs about hoarding, wasn't there?
Right. Like sort of gold in the, what was it called? Gold in the attic. I don't think it's called that.
No. Hoarding as in people who actually can no longer get in and out of their house because they have never thrown anything away.
Too many tins of Pringles between them and
every newspaper they've ever bought, you know,
yeah, right.
Kind of stuff. And now there are rats and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's not good.
I mean, there was.
I'd say that's a good point. That's a good litmus test, isn't it? If you're noticing rats, it might be time to declutter. You know.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, we talk a lot about falling. There's a horse. You're on it. The idea is to stay on the horse. Falling off either side of the horse is bad. And in this particular situation, one side of the horse would be, I need more stuff. I just got to get more and more stuff because that's going to make me happy. The other side maybe is, I need less stuff because if I have less stuff, then I'll be happy and satisfied. I think most of us, as you said, most of us probably do need less stuff, but I don't think that should be like, as a Christian anyway, I don't think it should be the controlling hermeneutic by which we evaluate our lives. And yes, I said the word hermeneutic on a Thursday afternoon. What's interesting is Jesus doesn't tell everyone he meets to give everything away. He does say that to the rich young man, but he says it to the rich young man precisely because that particular guy had a problem with an idol, namely the love of money. So when he goes to Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus says, I'll give away 50% of everything I have, Jesus doesn't say only 50%. No. It's got to be everything. Otherwise no deal. He says, today salvation has come to this house. So again, I think it's horses for courses. Sorry, I'm mixing my horse metaphors, but you know, if you're the sort of person who has made an idol of stuff and things and possessions, maybe you are, you know, a hoarder, then yeah, it would be good to take a leaf out of the Minimalist Handbook. Quite a nice short book to read. It's only a couple of pages. hardly any text on it.
Mostly white space.
Yeah, mainly good negative space. But you know what I mean? Like it's interesting. Jesus doesn't just say that to everybody. And I think often the caricature of Jesus from people who've not really read the Gospels is, he's basically a communist who says you shouldn't have any possessions at all. End of debate. But that's not the picture you get. It's much more subtle and nuanced than that, isn't it?
There's a book out by a guy called Jerry Bauer, which I think might have mentioned.
Yeah.
Because we have already recorded episode 101, which is about Bitcoin and money.
Yeah.
And so this guy has written a book called The Makers and the Takers. And it's a sort of an economic look at the gospel accounts. And The Makers versus the Takers, what Jesus really said about social justice and economics, by Jerry Bauer. And his thing is really interesting in that where is Jesus when he's talking about money? Who is he saying it to? And actually, one of the things, the way he talks about money in Jerusalem, where essentially you have a whole, essentially crony capitalism leeching off the temple, is different from how he speaks when he's in when he's in Galilee, where you basically got soul traders doing their own thing, trying to make a living fishing or whatever. So anyway, I've not read the book, but it sounded kind of interesting to me. And this is by an economist a Christian economist who's just sort of read the Bible. And I guess you could always do well, he would say that, wouldn't he? But there are plenty of economists who don't agree with his view of the economy, clearly. So I'm quite stacked. But ultimately, the motivation for it, I think, is really interesting, and that Jesus always gets at it. And I think that's, if we're looking for things I've learned over the podcast, over 100 episodes, I think this came out particularly in episode 101 to be released in the future, but also other episodes where I'm kind of happy with people saying, what about this? Couldn't it be this or couldn't it be that? For example, the earth was created in 7 days and it's 7 literal days, or the earth was created in another way, or predestination. I'm sorry, it has to be Arminianism, because the thing is often, why do you want that to be true? You might be right, but it feels like you're longing for a version of God that allows you to think X or do X. What is that? Because that might be the main reason why we know our capacity for self-delusion is incredible. And that's essentially the entire sitcom industry is based on human self-delusion. The character who thinks one thing about themselves, but is actually something else. Lack of self-knowledge is pretty much key. And
of course that cuts both ways, isn't it? Because I can imagine an Arminian saying to a Calvinist, all right, why do you need this to be true of God?
Yeah,
you know, it is an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, because you can hold a doctrine with great glee.
Yeah, because it's just your personal preference rather than
and it's like, that therefore I don't have to do the thing that I don't want to do. I don't believe in international mission, which gets me off the hook from going to countries I don't want to go to because they sound awful. You know? It's like, okay, well, that's not an honest way of doing theology.
But it's, as you say, it's very hard, isn't it, to detect that in your own heart, because our desires in our heart have a way of sort of climbing up the esophagus and forming lenses through which we read the Bible. And that filter it's like we don't see particular verses. And it's funny, I was thinking about Jonathan Edwards today, talking to a friend of mine, Dr. Steve Nichols, dropping a name there. And he was talking about the way that people in his era would diarize, and Puritans would write diaries endlessly. And the reason for that was precisely because they didn't trust their own hearts. And so the idea of a diary was just write out everything that's in there, so that's where you're holding it up to the light. And by means of doing that, you start to detect maybe species of hypocrisy in yourself and so on.
I'm pleased to announce, by the way, that the comments on YouTube are now working.
Hooray! With about 5 minutes to go, it's finally happening. That's good.
Well, we could go for as long as we want.
Sure.
We
could, having talked about minimalism.
Yes, that's right. I wouldn't mind just having a quick chat about Bible translation before we do disappear into the night.
I was just going to say one last thing before we leave minimalism, is that somebody, of course, has been the minimalist par excellence in Christian history. Do you know about Simon Stylites and his whole thing? He's
not the guy who sat on a pole for 30 years, is he?
Yeah, he sat on a pole for a long time in Syria in the 5th century, which is that's about as minimal as it gets. But what do you own? It's basically a pole, which is. Do you have a chair?
I rent that. I don't own it.
Do you have a chair? Well, no, that is the pole. The pole is the chair. And what about a table? Again, the pole. But asceticism, which I think that's a really good example of, that has a really, talking about deceptiveness of the heart, asceticism like that has a really insidious way of becoming all about us, doesn't it? And a bit sort of, there's quite a lot of this in scripture, the critique of asceticism, having the appearance of godliness, but having no power to transform. And, a lot of the sort of the practices in Jesus' day from the Pharisees and so on, it just, it is not the way to godliness. It's kind of the path away from it in lots of ways. So we've got to be careful with that kind of stuff, I think.
Somebody said, is there any chance of a jingle? And I don't know what happens if I...
Oh, mate, I can do a jingle.
What happens?
Yeah.
If you hear it or not. If I do this...
Go on, do it.
Can you hear this?
Yeah.
And Cary have words. Hashtag totes to
Totes to
Prav.
Prav. Yeah, I did hear that. We all heard it, James.
Great.
We all heard it.
So jingles are possible. That's good to know.
Yeah, anything is possible in this wonderful world of the internet. Sorry, I interrupted you. We were going to move on to another email.
Yes, although actually, just before we get there, there was an email from Alex who referred to the episode we did about lust. And he just points out that we were relatively disparaging about internet software that stops you from looking at things you shouldn't be looking at.
Yeah, this was
It
very good
basically doesn't really work, or it's not really getting at the root of the problem. And he has, I think, with some justification, pushed back about it. And he creates quite a good picture, which I wouldn't mind just reading.
Yeah, do, because it was really helpful.
Yeah. He says, for guys that struggle with this amounts to walking into your office to work for the day and sitting down at your desk. Then imagine a few workers come in and they hang a sheet across your office, dividing it in half. One of the guys peeps around the sheet and says, all right, we're going to bring the girls in now. They'll be over here and naked. There's just 6 or 8 of them, but this shouldn't concern you on your side of the sheet. They won't giggle too loudly. Please carry on.
That's very good.
Now try to work and try not to peek around the side of the sheet. What? You're struggling with this? Now and then he goes on. Now that's quite a picture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very good.
Now, the really spiritually poisonous part, he says, in my opinion, comes when we then blame that struggle on a failure to love Christ or a failure to believe the gospel. Surely the one who loves Christ refuses to work in that office. Surely the one who loves Christ is willing to make sacrificial decisions that protect purity and holiness. Surely using accountability software and filters is the modern day equivalent of fleeing Potiphar's wife with your cloak in her hand. Fair point.
Yeah, there's lots to be gleaned there. I get it, but there's a sense in which, even take away the analogy of the computer and the office. I mean, you walk outside the office, you walk away from this scenario where there's naked ladies behind a sheet, and you go out into the world. There's still naked ladies behind a sheet everywhere you go.
Right.
So the issue is, this is the world we live in now. Right. Might it be the case that it's a good thing for you to throw away not just put accountability software on your computer, throw away your computer? Yeah, maybe. So I think he raises a really good point. It's not that accountability software is of no value. I used to have Covenant Eyes on my computer.
Right.
And knowing that my pastor could see all the websites I'd visited was helpful, I think. Yeah. But for me personally, and this is where, again, I hope I don't make him angry, Alex. But for me, the words he uses, it's an essential part of the battle for every Christian male. And for me, it can certainly win you some breathing space. But for some, it may be that for some people, it's like, they've had trouble with alcohol, so they can never go in a pub for the rest of their lives. Yeah. The issue is thinking of yourself with sober judgment. If you know that's a problem, then yeah, don't go near a pub. It should go without saying, I would have thought. So I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying, the last thing I would say is, don't do everything you can to stay clear of pornography. Just do the minimal amount. I'm not saying that at all. I would say we need to use whatever means are at our disposal. But my point was, and I think still is, that by removing the means of temptation, which is of course important, Joseph Potiphar's wife, but by removing the means of temptation, you do not kill necessarily the inner desire for pornography. So it's not therefore a long-term strategy. You have to deal with the heart. So by all means, I feel like I'm getting really preachy here, but I do feel quite passionate about it. By all means, deal with what your eyes are looking at. That's crucial, of course. But you have to deal with the heart. Otherwise, you end up just playing whack-a-mole. The Covenant Eyes software will make the mole disappear for a time because you think to yourself, oh no, I don't want my pastor to learn about that, so therefore I won't do it. But you need a better motivation than that long term if it's really going to stick. And often the mole just comes back twice as strong next time. So I think we love talking about weird parts of the Bible, James. I think there's a really weird bit of the Bible, Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 to 45, where Jesus talks about the evil spirit returning to a person who has swept themselves clean and put themselves in order. You know the bit where it talks about that the demon will come back with 7 of his friends, much more evil than the initial
Right.
demon.
Wow.
And it's like,
Yes.
what on earth is
Yeah.
that about?
Yeah.
And the key thing to understanding that, I think, is he's talking to the Pharisees. So he's saying you have the appearance of being clean, but that puts you in an extremely dangerous place because you haven't dealt with the heart.
Mm.
You hate sin. That's great, but you don't really love God. And if you leave the second part out of that equation unaddressed, then you'll be worse off in the end than you were in the first place. So I heard a really hair-raising story. We did a Christianity Explored conference in Pennsylvania about, I don't know, 10 years ago. And it was right in the heart of Amish community. And one of the ladies who came to the conference was a librarian, a local librarian. And
is she Amish and a librarian?
No, she was not Amish herself, but she worked in the local sort of municipal library, right?
I can't think of anybody more non-confrontational than an Amish librarian.
It'd be very, very quiet indeed.
Yeah.
That's right. She probably wouldn't even say shh.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I said to her, what can you tell us about, living in the community with the Amish? I mean, how does that work out? And she said, I'll tell you one thing that's fascinating as a librarian. You do not want to check the internet history after the Amish lads have come in and used the library computer.
Right.
She said it's the most appalling pornography that they come in and use. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Well, even more than the guys who are just totally secular. She's like, yeah, oh yeah, much worse.
Yeah, because also they've got their own phones.
They've got their own phones, right? There's that. But there's also, I think, a whack-a-mole thing where in their community, all right, you don't even have the option to gratify that kind of desire. But because you've pressed it down and pressed it down and pressed it down, there is a danger that if you don't replace that with a commensurate love of God, then once you get half a chance to actually look at, you're going to really go all out, because the 7 demons are going to fly in there. So anyway, again, I just want to reiterate, this is not a knock on accountability software any more than it would be a knock on having accountability in your local church. But the point is, those things can't deal with the human heart, ultimately.
Yeah. Here's a jingle.
Cheers.
There we go. We are living the dream.
The sound of men with a copy of Logic Pro and too much time on their hands.
Yes, exactly. So it may surprise listeners and viewers to note that the thing that caused more emails than anything else in the last year was our episode on Bible translations.
Oh yeah, can of worms.
Yeah, we had many lengthy emails on this. By lengthy, I mean 1,000 words plus, which I thought was very interesting. And in general, I don't think anyone was wildly saying that we were way off the mark, but I think some people were injecting some form of balance, which I guess is not unreasonable.
There's no place for that here.
Yeah. So Tom got in touch to say that he trialed the ESV while preaching through 1 Peter.
Oh, interesting.
I was looking forward to fewer statements like, actually, the original means this.
Right.
Yeah. Imagine my horror when I came to 1 Peter 2:8. I'm afraid I will have to imagine it. And found the ESV mistranslates a slave's word as servants. Servants, right, at least to modern English ears, are free to leave if they don't like the situation as they are. Slaves aren't. Neither as citizens or wives in the context. That's the point. Submit even when you're powerless. Especially when you're powerless. The ESV is softening the translation. So, and then he says, my congregation is in the demographic most likely to be receptive to the ESV as opposed to other translations. Everyone has a degree, if not 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. They struggle to read, but yet they still struggle to read it out loud, really struggle. That's because it's horribly unnatural in places. Who starts a very long sentence with the word inasmuch? Luke 1:1, yuck. So,
well, in as much as that's true, what would
I
you
think
say
in
to
as
that?
much is an easy word to say, but
sure, piece of cake, yeah.
But there are 2 things here. One is I don't think we're claiming the ESV is without error. Mm-hmm. But secondly, I would say it doesn't surprise me that people struggle to read any version because they don't read it properly. and we don't have a culture of reading scripture publicly well. I've mentioned this on this podcast before, and I wrote a newsletter about it. If you go to my newsletter on Substack, then...
But hang on, you could be David Suchet. You could argue that he would still struggle a bit with in as much to a modern audience.
I don't know. Maybe not.
I mean, he's a very gifted actor, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, and he has read the Bible, and he reads the Bible.
Indeed he does, yeah.
But what I'm saying is that some of these things may require work to read well. So the NIV may be an easier read superficially, like if it's sight read, but I urge you not to sight read the Bible publicly. I think you should prepare.
Yes. That does constitute pastoral advice.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So I think I have a bit of a thing about that. But yeah, fair enough. I mean, if their experiences is hard to read out loud, then it's not for me to say that they don't. But yeah, the NIV just makes me wince more often than not, because I tend to prepare stuff in the ESV, and my church uses the NIV, and then I find myself having to say those dreaded words. Actually, the original means ...
Yeah, and I think my unease with more dynamic translations, I'm thinking here of the NIV, but particularly something like, say, the New Living Translation or something like that, is that and the reason why I'm prepared to forgive the ESV quite a lot is because I like to know that there's a road bump rather than have it smoothed out for me and not be aware that it was ever there. You know what I mean? Because then I can choose how to kind of deal with it.
Yeah.
That said, with Christianity Explored, we made the decision to use the NIV rather than the ESV. And to be honest with you, I think especially given the target audience, which is, people who are not used to reading the Bible, non-believers, I think that was probably a pretty good choice to go with the NIV.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, as I say, it's like Microsoft. No one ever got fired for buying the NIV. So also we had an email from Johnny, who sent us a long email, which he admits was as much for his sake as for ours. He felt an awful lot better after having typed it. He admitted at the bottom. And, he says you picked a few examples where the literal translation did a much better job than dynamic. And I agreed with them. However, there'll always be examples either way. Fair enough. And also he says, you guys are both artists and love your words. We do. I mean, Barry said the word commensurate earlier. And I didn't even comment.
Hermeneutic.
Yeah. And hermeneutic. We commented on that.
Good.
He says, but as someone who doesn't, I have sympathy for simplicity in a translation which doesn't compromise on theological accuracy. So whilst I agree we shouldn't try to avoid rich theological terms, I don't see why we need archaic words that supposedly are closer to the original meaning, but slightly nonsensical, need to be there. So whilst I would love to explain what blessed and propitiation means, once I'm having to explain what the wayside and being with child mean, I think that makes the Bible seem unnecessarily separated from people. However, and this is my response to that, I have sympathy with that view. I think that's a perfectly valid point. I think we've assumed the Bible needs to be easy for everyone to read. And we've missed the fact that it was written in Greek. The disciples didn't speak Greek. They spoke Aramaic. And the first listeners to the Gospels were also native Aramaic speakers who understood New Testament Greek, but it probably wasn't their first language. It might not have been. And it was distributed in New Testament Greek to all kinds of dialects all over, and people were preaching in their own language. But I just make the point that we've just assumed that the Bible shouldn't be in any way difficult to read or be removed from my everyday language. And the original Bible wasn't written that way. So it wasn't necessarily written in brilliant Greek prose, like Mark's Gospel is a bit rough and ready and rushed, Kai Euthius and immediately and all that.
Immediately, yeah.
But yeah, I just want to push back on this idea that it has to be in the language of the street and the language of the people, because it wasn't written in the language of the street and the language of the people. It was written in Greek, which was the lingua franca, ironically. The lingua franca. Is there anything in that? Am I being a bit...
There's something in it, but all I would say is I think it did make sense, I think, for the New Testament to be in Greek, simply because most of the target audience, probably at the time, spoke Greek. So obviously Paul, writing 50% of the New Testament, the apostle to the Gentiles, Greek mainly being spoken there. So it's not like, and like you say, because it was read out, of course, in the initial instance. All right, it wasn't like distributing the Bible. Has everybody got a copy? Okay, no, it's just read out. I can imagine there was a lot of on-the-fly translation going on, with people in the pews, not in the metaphorical pews, whispering to each other, translating into Aramaic or into whatever they were speaking. So I would say, yeah. When you say it should be an effort to read, I'd say yes and no. Yes, we should expect to have to work at understanding scripture. You don't get fit without sweating, yada, yada, yada.
Mm.
But I don't think God wanted us to deliberately leave scripture in Koine Greek so that we'd all have to work for it a bit. I don't think that was it. I mean, Tyndale and Luther clearly felt it was good and right to translate into a language that could be readily understood by as many people as possible. I think that's a good instinct.
Yeah.
But, and here's where we start getting into what everybody's quite rightly brought up in their emails. As soon as you start translating, inevitably you have to start making judgment calls on where on the spectrum you're going to be between dynamic and literal. And there are pros and cons. Personally, as I've already said, I feel closer to the original Greek with a literal translation, which makes me feel a bit more comfortable. And I'm comfortable with unpacking unfamiliar idioms and words. Like, for me, that's a good trade. That's a trade-off I'm happy to make. I'd rather not remain blissfully unaware of something that is actually in the original. But other people's mileage may vary,
Yeah. Also, I said to Johnny, I replied to his email as well, and I just said, we could learn New Testament Greek. We could maybe not watch TV for a year.
Yeah.
And learn New Testament Greek. And then we wouldn't need a translation. But we don't. We could.
Yeah.
But we don't.
Yeah.
So I'm aware that unbelievers are not going to learn New Testament Greek. Trust us, it'll be worth it. It'll pay off. That's a bit of a leap. But I just want to bang that drum a bit. Partly, obviously, because I'm sanctimoniously, doing Greek myself. So I would say that, wouldn't I?
No, I think it's really important to say. And we just had a comment from Tim on the YouTube chat. One of the assumptions is, I suppose, that every Christian should be reading their own Bible. Therefore, the Bible needs to be accessible to all. But most Christians in history were not readers. I've just been reading the dialogue. What's it called? I think it's called The Account of Phoebe. Phoebe was a girl in Jonathan Edwards's congregation in 18th century New England, who is described by Edwards in the most glowing terms as the most extraordinary believer, praying fervently for friends and family, talking about Jesus to all and sundry. And she was 4 years old. So she was barely reading anything, I imagine. Her parents, in fact, thought that she was too young. There's no point in talking to Jesus about her because she's not going to understand any of it. She's 4, But her older brother got converted, and obviously she overheard her brother talking. And Bob's your uncle. She's suddenly this incredible example of a faith-filled believer. So again, just to say, yes, we can sometimes get hung up on translations of the Bible when God's word is just mind-blowingly powerful.
Yeah.
Whether read or listened to.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we've got some other ones here, but I don't think we need to jump into too much. Matt in Cambridge. So Miriam reckons that we should probably read Bible translation, Bible introductions. And that just made me think, because that then tells you what are the terms and conditions of this Bible, and you just think that's great. The only person I know who reads introductions in the Bible are, again, my friend Matthew, who gave me this whiskey.
This is definitely product placement now.
Yeah,
it's crossed the line, I think.
He is always reading introductions to Bibles and also Mormon Bibles, including it's up here.
Here it is, the Book of Mormon.
Book of Mormon. And so what is written in the very front of this here, he's actually highlighted this one. They change the introduction and they don't tell anyone that they've changed it.
Yeah, cheeky.
So
my dad, by the way, used to collect tracts from Jehovah's Witnesses and places, and he would dutifully keep them in his study but just in case future generations, i.e. me,
Yeah.
hold of them and started reading them, he would really fastidiously go through and underline stuff and say, this is heresy, or, here's a cross reference, this is a lie, that kind of stuff. It's really something.
Lest he be mistaken.
That's right.
Miriam also says that, so read the introduction so that you know what the translator's trying to do. And I just wondered, what is less read in the Bible even more than the introduction? And I just thought maybe Zephaniah. I don't recall ever, no one reads Zephaniah, do they? I mean, they should. I mean, Jude. Do people ever read Jude? I don't think they get past the bit about the angels arguing over St. Michael arguing over the body of Moses.
You think it'd be the ideal book for today's hurried consumer, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But here's the other thing. And I talked to Andrew Satch, who's going through 1 and 2 Kings for...
that's First and Second Kings.
For the Keswick Convention. Yes, that's right. Yeah, for the Keswick Convention, and we were talking, and actually I've spoken to him. So I'm making a Patreon only episode about the resurrection because I don't think we talk about that very clearly. Paul Huxley's just said Zephaniah is my favorite book of the Bible. Of course it is, Paul. My question would be, is there a book of the Bible that you've never heard a sermon on? And for me, I've never heard a sermon on Jeremiah that I can remember. And Jeremiah is a massive book.
You've not been listening to enough Tim Keller.
And it's a massive book. And he's a major, he's not a minor prophet. He's a major prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of keep preaching Genesis, Exodus, Gospels, bit of Joshua, letters. That's it. And now Psalms are back. Psalms are back in vogue.
Right. Right.
But I don't know. It just feels like I was talking to Andrew about that because 1 and 2 Kings is obviously, I mean, nobody gets to the end of 2 Kings in a preaching series. It just doesn't happen. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that, and this is a great argument for proper expositional preaching. There's not a verse I can point to in scripture which says you've got to do expositional preaching, but it's a good common sense reason for doing it, because otherwise there's just huge swathes of the Bible you probably ignore.
Yeah,
because we're simple people. And
there are no bits where it says at the top of the chapter you can skim this.
Right. Yeah.
I just really worry that there are tons and tons of pages of scripture that we've skimmed, and it's just like, no, don't skim God's inerrant word. Don't scroll through the Bible as if it's Instagram, and just stop at the bits that pique your interest.
I know it's another genealogy. Slow down. This is God's word. Yeah.
Aren't you even curious as to some of the names?
Right.
So because he says, would perhaps the aversion to wrestling with scripture and standard English words like propitiation and the love for mash talk, what's that, be reason for...
I'm not sure what that is.
The debilitating biblical illiteracy that abounds. I think that's kind of... I think
we've talked about that, haven't we? That I would agree with you that my worry is that it's a sort of a slippery slope. If you ditch the words like propitiation, then you start to lose the things that are enshrined in those words. That's the doctrine that is unpacked from those words.
Yeah, but also, Tyndale wanted in the language of the people, but he also invented words.
Exactly.
When he invents the word atonement or mercy seat or whatever it is, people are going, "What's that?" Yeah. Sorry, Tyndale, don't use words that people don't know.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? The imaginary dialogue is, oh, I don't understand that word you've just said. Bye. Yeah. When actually the reality is surely more like, I don't understand that word. What does that mean? Yeah. At which point you say, I'm glad you asked.
Yes.
I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you about that. And I think that's the benefit. We also had an email about the distinction between atonement, using the word atonement and the word propitiation. That is my answer to you about that particular distinction, because, sorry, that was a very poor Peter Griffin impression. That if you just say atonement these days, there's an awful lot of unbiblical freight which is read into that word. So I say atonement, and the guy that's listening to me, or gal, typically understands something different from what I mean by it. Whereas if I say the word propitiation, again, people are, because they don't know the word, they're forced to say, what does that mean? And you say, I'm glad you asked. It means this. So there's less danger of misunderstanding, ironically, by using the difficult word. Is my point to you.
That's my point. My point to you. We should probably wrap this up. We've been wibbling along far too long.
Probably haven't we, really?
Through most of these. Sorry, Jessica's just pointed us and our attempted American accent.
My wife does the same thing. Don't ever do that again, Barry. It's horrible.
Oh, I don't know. I think mine is okay occasionally.
Mash means soft baby food.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's
fair enough. Pablum. That's another word for you. Pablum.
Pablum, is that soft baby food?
Sort of. Pablum is like sort of warmed over, bland food. So people often say, don't give me that political pablum. People are always saying that down the pub, aren't they, James?
I've literally never heard that word before.
Pablum. I think it's Latin, isn't it? It must be Pablum.
It sounds Latin, but I've never come across it. Pablum?
Jess has just said no. I don't know what no to. Hang on, let me just look up.
I do not care.
Pablum, here we go. Bland or insipid intellectual fare or entertainment. Pap comes from the mid-17th century, from Latin, from the stem of pascere, to feed.
Okay.
So there you go, Pablum. That was a longer than necessary diversion.
I've learned a word.
In many ways describes our entire oeuvre these past 100 episodes. A long, unnecessary diversion.
Yes.
Which we're very grateful to you for joining us on that diversion, taking the scenic route through theology, etc.
I suspect a disproportionate number of people who are watching the live stream, at least, are already Patreon members, and I can recognize some of the names. But and therefore, you will be receiving this now. I've proofread this. This is the Cooper and Cary Write Words annual, and we're going to release it monthly. So January is here, where the main topic of conversation is Veganuary, which mercifully people aren't talking about at the moment because obviously we've got other fish to fry.
Isn't it Veganuary?
I would say Veganuary.
Oh, I suppose you would. Yeah, that's probably better, isn't it? Your way is less potentially problematic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and also
carry on.
Yeah, because you don't say you're vegan, you're a vegan.
You're right, but you do say January, obviously. But yes, I think your way is better.
Yeah. So anyway, if you join us on Patreon, you will be receiving that probably tomorrow or the day after, at least at the very end of January, whenever you get this. So people are listening in the future. I have no idea what to say to you, but join us on Patreon, where you get video episodes of every episode. So I was just seeing Tim
in the comments.
Tim has just said Pablum. Cooper and Cary pabble together.
Yeah, paddling away like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
But yes, it is. I don't know whether it's an advertisement to say that you get video on the episodes, but you also get longer episodes. So typically we talk for 20, 30 minutes longer than you get on a Thursday official dropped episode. So if you've enjoyed any of this endless waffle, do join us on Patreon for as little as $3 a month. You too can join that happy band of people who really are a lovely bunch. So we love you guys. We love all of you, whether you're a patron or not.
Definitely.
But, yeah.
So send us an email, cooperandcary@gmail.com. We do often just answer them without reading them out, but sometimes we read them out in a mailbag episode.
Yeah.
We're excited that we've got an episode coming up next time about Bitcoin, which I mentioned earlier. And we're also talking to Carl Truman about partly about his new book, but also other things, because he has words and opinions
about critical race theory, among other things. So I think we ought to probably talk to him about that.
Yeah. So we look forward to that. And if you have any other ideas for what we should talk about on the podcast, do get in touch. It'll be great. Anyway, we babbled quite enough. Thanks very much for listening and for watching, if you've watched, and for commenting. And we will speak to you next time. Cheerio.
Love everybody. Cheerio.
Right. How do I get us off YouTube?
I don't know. Well, we could just hit the nuclear option and just hit leave the